or
Sure.
in another
Well,
city?
just to understand this deal, it's kind of funny. The seller was in California. The wholesalers, I have a partner, are in Dallas and Phoenix. The buyer is in Denver, Colorado. So none
Ah,
of us were in the actual city that we were doing the transaction. The only people that were in the city were property management and the title company.
all right, welcome everybody. Today we are joined again by Chris Mayfield, our good friend, and he has a really exciting and unique deal that he wanted to share. And so we're going to walk through just a discussion, walking through step by step his wholesale deal where he recently wholesaled an apartment complex. So step by step, specifically how to do that wholesale deal, as well as getting some insight into virtual wholesaling, which I know a lot of people are interested in. It's kind of a hot topic right now. So, welcome, Chris. Good to have you back, man. Always.
Always glad to be here.
Well, so you have been telling me different bits and pieces of this deal, and every story seemed wilder and wilder. So so walk us through, each step for this wholesale deal so that people can get a big picture
Sure.
process. So
Yeah.
how did this thing start? What was
I
the
think
origin?
this, I think starting off, this was a 7 month deal, I believe, either 6.5 months or 7 months, which is not typical, but it does remind me, as it should everyone, that fortune is in the follow up. Not everyone's going to say yes immediately. And it's how you are fostering those leads and doing that touch, sometimes weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, sometimes monthly, to get it done. You'll have to forgive me. It would have either been a cold call or a text. I know the initial phone call was from us to the seller after that initial cold call or text was from my son, who at the time was 19. I don't think he was turned 18. Yeah, 19. So he made the initial call to the seller after we got our initial lead in from the text or cold call VA. And it started at that point. Understanding or what my son understood in this moment was we had reached out because of one of many properties that this seller had in Memphis. And that led to eventually my son approaching me saying, this would be one in regards to acquisition that I need you to be a part of, because he saw it was going to be something a little bit larger. And so that's first. I mean, in the process of
Okay.
wholesaling, number one, you've
So
got to figure out a way to get in front of a seller. And in this case, it would have been a text, which we were sending out. He personally would do text. And through batch, he would send out 250, probably 2-3 times a day. So he'll send them out, somewhere between 8 and 9 in the morning. Just hitting the computer the way it does, it spits them out. And then he kind of massages those over the next 2 or 3 hours as far as responses. They'll come in, stop. So he'll immediately remove those people, and he can put those into kind of hot, cold, medium. And then it's a process of, they never will go more than 3 texts before we want them on the phone. So the initial text comes in, they'll come back, they'll say something. On the second text that our texter will say is, would there be a good time that I could give you a phone call and talk through this property? So that would usually be on our second text, but no more than 3, we tell them.
okay.
And then there's the initial call.
So when your son he gets this lead, he made that initial phone call. Is he following a script? Is he just building rapport? What's that first phone call like?
Yeah, absolutely on the script. We want to have a focused attention, so that we don't get, we obviously want them to have a conversation, obviously rapport first, second motivation. But in that, we want to stay on task. So the script is there for us every bit as much as it is for the seller. It's to keep us on task to get from start to finish, to work through rapport, motivation, and then we'll get into the actual property. And in this case, it ended up being apartments, single family, and some duplexes is how the initial thing started.
Okay. So how did you, so before we get into following that script, how did you get this seller? Was it a list for single family homes or was it a list
Yeah,
for apartments?
it would have been
Okay.
single family.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so he had the additional holdings. Interesting. So when your son called, did he know about the apartments or he was just
He was
following?
literally calling about one property, and sometimes a seller will reveal, I have multiple properties. But another thing I always want to encourage people is, let's say he did call on that property and he said, no, I'm not interested in selling that. We always follow up with, would there be possibly any other properties that you would be looking to sell? Because when I first got started, they would say no, and you'd hang up the phone. Well, what if they own two? What if they own three? What if they own 35? If somebody called you about a property, right? And you said, no, I'm not interested in selling that one. And then they hung up and you were like, oh, I would have been willing to sell this other one, but they didn't
Yeah.
ask. So we always ask that question. Do you have any other properties or land that you might be looking to sell in the near future?
Okay.
And then, or anybody else that that's actually, we say, do you have any other properties or do you know anybody that might be looking to sell any other properties or land in the near future? And sometimes they say, you know what, I actually have been thinking about, and in this case, the seller revealed that he is looking to sell his properties in Memphis because he's looking to get out of Memphis due to some other investments he's doing in another state. So that was when my son began to write out the addresses of everything he had, which was an apartment, a small apartment complex, 32 doors, and some other properties.
All right. Sure. So your son realizes it's a hot lead, gets all the addresses taken down, and what's the next step from there?
At that point, I don't know if it was a day later or 2 days later, we did a three-way phone call with my son, and actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think because he was over in my office, we just used his phone and did a speaker call, and he introduced me to the seller and said, "This is my partner. It just so happens to be my dad too," um, and that's kind of how it started. In that regard too, same thing. If you have an acquisitions person, you still start over. I'm still going to start over, even though I have a bunch of information. I'm a different person, so I've got to figure out a way to build rapport. My son has a different personality than me, so he might like Tay or not like me, or vice versa. So there's the niceties, the small talk, and then there was the process of, and our goal and the step-by-step process of wholesaling is, I'm there to serve the seller. Mr. Seller, how could we help you in this? I hear you want to get out of Memphis. What would be best for you? Because other people had called him about various properties that he had. And it was in that question that he said, well, what I'd like to do is move all of it. And so I just said, if I could be committed to doing that, would you be interested if I made a commitment to help you move all of it? And of course he asks, what would that look like? And I said, well, it would look like this. We would either buy, or I would connect you to the investor, because I'm connected to other investors who would want to buy. So I was very transparent with them. I don't know if I would buy all of them. I mean, I'd love to if the numbers are right. But what I'll commit to you doing is, we'll look at it as buying it first. And if not, then getting it to an investor who would want to buy it. So I was honest, which he appreciated, and said, okay, I would be interested in that because I'm looking to move all of them.
So if he has multiple properties and you maybe keeping some, maybe wholesaling some, does that mean you need a separate contract for each property, or does that change the process at all?
No, whether you're going to write out 10 agreements, you know, or write out one for one of the properties, it's still the same. I mean, you do have to write out an agreement for each property, so we would have to do that. But what he did is he came back and he said, here's the deal. If you could really help me, he felt like that the houses and duplexes would sell. So he said, if what I'd like to do is move the apartment first so that I know I'm not stuck with that there. And then from there, we'll then do a block of the 5 homes and a block of the 4 duplexes. So that's when we began and that took us, just so you know, I want people to understand that I know everybody, oh, I can make, $30,000 in 30 days. You could, I made 27.5 on my first one, but they're all different. A seller has a different reason of why he has to sell. And if you're there to serve him, you got to move within their timeline. And if you try to push them, you're just going to lose that, So know that some can close in 7 days and some can close in 21 days and some are going to take 6.5, 7 months.
I think that's a great point. You're there to serve them, their specific situation and their specific concerns. So
ultimately, they don't need me. They don't need me. I mean, but if I can provide a service that helps them,
yeah,
they'll want to partner with me. And I point blank asked him one day because I still didn't know him well. I was probably 3 or 4 weeks into this. And I just said, hey, why are you working with me? I literally asked him that because I knew tomorrow he could call me and say, hey, somebody came and gave me an offer, so I'm just going to do that. Right. And he said, because I believe you're telling me the truth. I believe that you're not trying to tell me something just to get my deal, that you truly believe that you can move these properties. So he trusted me, which was great. That's ultimately what you want to do. If somebody doesn't like you, they're probably not going to do business with you.
Yeah. It's a people business, 100%. So
it couldn't be about me. It couldn't be about me.
Mm-hmm.
I've always learned that regardless of if I'm buying the house or assigning, if you make it about you, it's just really going to be difficult to get that deal.
Sure. So, all right. So at this stage, he says he wants to move the apartments first. And so what's the process for, how did you nail down the contract for the apartments? How did you figure the resale value and what your offer was? How does that work?
Well, there's so many things.
I'll give you one of those easy questions.
Yeah, no. It wasn't cut. It wasn't just black and white. It was, he started at, this is the price I wanted. And he said he had been offered that price before. I don't know when he had been offered, but this is kind of where he wanted to be to move that. So then I needed to do a little bit of research and find out, per door, is that a good deal? Right. So one of the things that I did was I reached out to my property manager in that same city and said, you guys manage things like this. Is this a good deal for the people that you manage for? And they came back and said, yes. I didn't do any, and I want to say this because you don't have to be the smartest person in the world. I always used to think, man, I just don't understand all the numbers and all the financing. I don't know. I'm a big picture guy. I'm a vision guy. I just want to help the guy move the property. And so to me, something in this business is you got to be consistent. You got to be perseverant. But I think you got to be resourceful. And in that moment, I just turned to other people. Hey, is this a good deal? I have a former student in my ministry who has bought 3 apartment complexes, much larger than this, and I just turned to him. Is this a good deal? Can you give me 5 minutes and tell me if this is legit? My property manager, I reached out to them. I reached out to a couple other people and said, hey, what do you think about this? And so you can kind of look at that and see, okay, this is, And it just so happened, I had somebody in my life that was looking to place some money and buy something like this. So I kind of went down that road with them. And then because they weren't as experienced, they kind of backed off. They didn't think it was a bad deal. They just were like, man, I don't know. They're in a different state, you know. But then again, you don't quit. So I went back to the property manager, and she had two or three other people, as well as I had three or four other people that wanted to buy it.
Hmm.
But then one began to kind of emerge that was super interested and had performed over and over with my property management company. So that's kind of how it began to take shape. It wasn't a typical wholesale deal in that I get it under contract at 70% less repairs, you know, because that's not what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with a small apartment complex. But just because I couldn't do my typical math doesn't mean it's still not a deal.
Right. What was the situation with the complex? Was it performing as it should? Were there value add?
It was definitely a value add. It was not performing at what it could been, and that was because of that property management company
Mm,
hadn't performed well. And my seller was busy with a lot of other things, so he wasn't, you know, managing it kind of day to day or month to month or whatever you want to call it, because he's getting checks, and he's not even flying out there. So yeah, there was definitely definitely a value add, definitely a different management company would make it a much better deal because they would shore up some stuff, some quick fixes, and long term, the buyer and the property management knew that if it was properly taken care of, then yeah, it would be a great investment.
sure. All right. So you get it under contract, you put it out there and have multiple people interested. One buyer seems to rise to the surface that they're legitimately interested and ready to follow through with it. And what was the process after that point?
Well, you know, you're dealing with people and you're dealing with personalities. And, you know, obviously a buyer is going to want to see things. Physically, they're going to want to walk into 3, 4, 5, 6 of these apartments, you know, to get an
Right.
idea. They're probably not going to walk through all 32, but they need to walk through at least 6, you know, to kind of get a theme of what they're seeing, right? And there was a couple of vacant they could get them in, but that was another difficulty was the property management company just wasn't motivated. It's not their deal. Actually, they're going to lose it if they sell it.
Right.
So why are they going to be motivated? So had to send my buyer with my property manager over there, and they send a maintenance guy, and he doesn't have the keys to get into the laundry room, and doesn't care that we can't get in. Walks into a vacant one, and then just randomly knocks on a door of a tenant. You know, so it was a bad visit, and they ended up having to go back 2 more times to get an accurate assessment. And each time the management company said they would send somebody more responsible. And each time, the last time, the buyer said, look, we've got to see this. And so the seller calls his own management company and says, he calls I think the owner of the company says, you got to get this done. I've got to get somebody out there that can get them in this property. Sent the same guy.
No way. Holy mackerel.
Gave them their word that it would be better, and it was the same deal. But they
So
saw some different apartments.
you're telling me
Uh,
this management company wasn't managing the complex to its full potential? That seems hard to believe.
no, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do have to be careful with management companies because it's their job, but again, it's still not their investment. It's your investment.
Yeah.
But you know, again, it was the resourcefulness. It was not quitting. It was okay. My management and buyer are like, look, we want to move forward, but we've got to get a better picture, you know, of what this thing is doing. And the numbers weren't great and older, and so it's just a lot of. Again, it comes down to being a personable person, and your job is to go between. The seller has some things, the buyer has some things, and you've got to get with what both of them want to make sure both of them feel good about this, or they're not going to do this transaction. The seller, of course, they've got their certain things on closing costs and what their price that they want. And then the buyer, of course, is looking at it from a standpoint of, not only my purchase price, but what am I going to financially have to do right away? And I think as a wholesaler, you gotta get out of just, hey, I'm going to get it under contract and hey, I'm going to sell it. It's, hey, I'm going to serve this person. I'm going to serve this person, right? Because I'm going to be a seller one day and I'm going to be a buyer one day. And if I think like that, I'll be a better a wholesaler.
Yeah.
So after just tons of writing contracts and then amending it, then just scrapping it and writing it over, I think we probably did it 6, 7 times, at least. And then that doesn't include then the assignment and what you got to do there, because got a purchase and sale agreement that you're doing with the seller, right? So, okay, we're good. They feel good about where they're at and what we have in those terms. Okay. So the buyer, though, is going to sign an assignment agreement that says, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to step in the place of Chris and buy this property. So A is the seller, C is the buyer, B is the wholesaler who's technically under contract with the seller, and now C is going to step in place of you. So now you're going to be the assignor and they're going to be the assignee. But as soon as they sign that, they're going to want to see the original purchase sale agreement, because that's ultimately what they're stepping in the place of. And you can't hide that from them. You've got to let them know, because that's what they're coming to the closing table doing. Yes, we're under contract for this price, and yes, there's an assignment fee, so it's more. But in the end, this is all these things that we agreed with the seller, that buyer has to perform.
Right.
I'll stop right there and see where what you might want to ask.
So have you ever had any issues? I know a lot of people worry about, I have this assignment contract and then I reveal the original contract and that buyer sees how much is in the assignment fee. Or have you ever had any issues with pushback that you're making too much? Or
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
How do you handle that?
I just don't work with them anymore.
As simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, I had a large buyer in Dallas, Texas. They have a REIT. They manage, I don't know, a couple hundred, 300-400 properties, but they still buy. They're still also investors, even though they have this REIT. And he said, it's none of my business. You sent me a deal with a price tag on it. I looked at it. I determined that's a good deal. So at that point, whether you make 2,000 or 100,000 shouldn't matter. I said it was a good deal. Why don't I just buy it? Why all of a sudden do I have a problem with your capitalist part of making money?
Right.
He just said, I never, so that's kind of how I approach it. If you thought it was a good deal, why did it change when you saw how much of it was my assignment agreement? It shouldn't
Right.
matter. Don't get me wrong. If I say, hey, I'll make up, if I'm under contract for 100 and I'm selling it for 150, I don't expect every buyer to come in and go, I'll take it. Sometimes they'll say, hey man, would you do that for 145? I expect that. Their job is to, right? Where do they make their money? At the purchase price. Where do I make money? At the purchase price. So I'm not offended by that. And I'm not even offended when someone comes to me and goes, wow, you're making that much money. I just respond, yeah, man, isn't it great to live in America? And then if they say, well, I have a problem with it, then I say, man, I'm sorry that you feel that way. But did you said you wanted the deal at 150? Yeah. What has changed?
Right.
Nothing's
Well,
changed. So if they don't want to move forward, that's fine. I've got 2 people behind you that are ready to move, but you answered first, so I'm going to honor that and give you the chance to move forward. But if you have a problem with what I'm making and want to stop, I'm more than welcome to do that. I've got somebody else that's ready to go.
hey, I think too many people, when they see the wholesale or the assignment fee, don't take into consideration the amount of money spent on marketing and
Marketing.
screening calls and all the effort that goes into finding this lead, right? It looks sweet on that one assignment contract. You're not seeing everything behind it. So,
Absolutely.
have you ever had any issues, or were there any issues in this deal where the buyer sees the original contract and doesn't like something in those terms?
Um, no, I will say in this case, after the agreement, when we were trying to do a cash purchase, um, we learned that the seller had some deadline dates because he was going to use the money for a 1031 exchange.
Okay.
So after everything was done, on the last time we rewrote the contract, it changed and went to a seller finance deal, an owner finance, seller finance, whatever,
Mhm.
because the title needed to change names before a date. But my buyer, who has no problem bringing 25% of his total purchase price, which was somewhere in that $900,000 range, a little less than that. What, um, but the bank, the private bank they're using is like, they're approved, not an issue, but it's going to take us about 5 weeks at best, 8 weeks the longest to go through the paperwork to get it done. So my buyer's like, but I've got the 223 plus. So what we did is we went back to the seller because this is what he needed, and we wrote a seller finance agreement that, and just kind of, I'll keep it light and not get too in the details. But then, because of certain things, the 1031 group said he couldn't do it the way we were talking about it, just semantics of words. So again, going back and being resourceful and having, at that point, 5.5 months into the deal, it's like, well, we're not ending here. So I have another buyer in Dallas that was doing a 1031 with a lot more money. And I reached out to him and said, hey, can I get your 1031 connection? Because I know I'm going to need it too. So I reached out to a guy in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who's been doing 1031 since they wrote the law. I think it was 97, 98. Don't quote me on that. I just remember, like, whenever it became a law, this guy had already been in real estate, got it, and he became a 1031 exchange person and has been
Hmm.
doing it ever since. So again, just bend his ear. Hey, could I ask you a few questions? Is this doable? Can you do a seller finance? And he's like, well, yeah, absolutely. But it was just a matter of changing words to, instead of saying seller finance or that, saying subject to. We were using words like wrap, like wrapping it around it, and 1031 couldn't do that. But the words that this 1031 gave us, I eventually got this 1031 guy on the phone with my seller so that he could ask questions outside of his 1031 person because he didn't have a relationship with them. It's just a company.
Yeah.
And he was able to ask the same questions to have peace of mind to go back to his 1031 group and say, let's do it this way. And they agreed. So then we rewrote the contract with that verbiage so that it appeased his 1031 group and allowed everything to be up and up, straight integrity, which is what we want, and legal. We want all that to be good. And it didn't change anything from the buyer because he's still coming to buy it for a set price. And instead of putting, I think it was 50 or 100 down in that seller finance deal that we wrote out, he just brought all 25% because his bank was okay with that, which gave
Hmm.
the seller a little bit more on the front end there. But my point is that he had some specific needs, and we went out and found a way to make that work. And then we went back to our seller and said, are you okay with this? Because you're, at this point, they signed an assignment agreement that just has a total price. But now the contract is changing, right?
Yeah.
And so we want them to know that. We want to be very forthright. Hey, he's doing a 1031. The title has to change before your bank's going to be done with their part. And they were good with it. I mean, it really worked out that we had a great buyer who was very calm, has bought, many properties, and wasn't alarmed. And man, we were talking to seller, buyer, 1031 exchange. We got on the phone with his bank, so she could hear the deal and make sure they were okay with it. We learned for the first time, I've never done a deal like this, that this bank was willing to pay an assignment fee. There was I left out the whole disaster of, oh, they're not going to buy it for cash, which they could. They're going to get financing, which I totally understand. Oh, how are we going to do an assignment? Because banks generally don't do assignment fees. They'll only do the mortgage for the actual purchase price. God, I don't know this buyer. Is he willing to pay us outside? We even went to the seller and said, would you pay us our fee? And I mean, I did everything in this deal. I've never gone to the seller and said, hey, if I do this deal, will you still pay us, based on what they're, but it worked out that the bank was willing to do it. So I learned something totally different. They had started like 6 months ago that they would do assignment fees with their buyers.
That's sharp.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And just every problem you ran into, you just pulled in somebody else who may have a solution or has more experience in that area. So.
I mean, to back up, there's marketing and finding a seller, getting in a conversation with the seller, getting the seller under contract, now going to people that are looking for properties like that and marketing the contract. And it's actually a purchase and sale agreement. We're marketing that, not the property. And then the buyer says, I want to buy it, signs an assignment agreement. Then you hand the original agreement over to the buyer too. They're going to need that, one, because they're stepping in place. Two, they might have to give that to their hard money lender, their private lender. They want to see it, make sure everything's on the up and up. And then you close, right, at a title company. That's kind of the streamline of what happens. But, from getting under contract to closing, so many different circumstances come up. You could be looking for another seller on there. They were divorced, and so you've got to get the signature because technically they're still on title, or someone died and you've got to get legal proof that they died 5 years ago because maybe they didn't do any probate or anything, which is real simple, right? I mean, but just understand that from signed agreement to closed and funded, there could be so many different things that come up, whether you're a wholesaler or a buy and hold.
Yeah.
And it's how you are resourceful and not quitting determines whether or not that deal is going to finalize.
And so this was a 7-month deal. So you were putting out marketing and fronting your expenses, and didn't receive your proceeds from the wholesale deal for at least 7 months.
Yes, sir.
From that. And at what point do you receive your assignment? Is that coming from your buyer? Does that come from the title company at closing? How do you structure it?
Yeah. So for us, and I think it's pretty much par for the course, that when the property goes to close, the funds have been brought in by the buyer. The title company will close everything, and you'll generally get an email that says the property has closed and it's funded. Generally, if it's before noon, you'll receive a wire. If that's the way you choose to be paid, you'll generally receive a wire for your assignment fee that day. And typically, usually if it doesn't happen after 12, if it's after 12, you probably won't receive your money until the following day. Same thing with the buyer. If they close before 12 and they fund, the buyer is going to receive their proceeds that day. But generally, if it happens after 1, the proceeds are going to hit their bank the following day.
Sure.
But the title company has asked usually 3 to 7 days before that closing to turn in your wiring instructions, or do you want a check cut and mailed? They'll do either one.
So with this deal, the apartments were in Memphis. You are in Arizona.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So most wholesalers, in my market, most wholesalers I meet are running around in the neighborhoods trying to find the deals, and they're local, and they're trying to leverage their knowledge of the neighborhood with their network of buyers. how does it change if you go to a virtual wholesaling model? What's the, what do you need to be able to do that in any city or
Sure.
in another
Well,
city?
just to understand this deal, it's kind of funny. The seller was in California. The wholesalers, I have a partner, are in Dallas and Phoenix. The buyer is in Denver, Colorado. So none of
Ah,
us were in the actual city that we were doing the transaction. The only people that were in the city were property management and the title company. But everybody
interesting.
involved in the deal does not live in the state of Tennessee. So to answer your question, um, both are good. Arizona, I started, doing it here, but prices were just so crazy. And I don't just want to wholesale, I also want to invest. And the capital you need to get involved here is much more than a Dayton, Ohio, or a Memphis, Tennessee, or a Oklahoma City. And even in parts of Dallas Fort Worth with the owner finance type stuff that we do. So that's the only reason I kind of stepped back a little bit from Arizona. My wife's an agent here, so I mean, I'm always tapped in a little bit, and I live here and I love what I do, so I'm always looking, but I'm not spending marketing dollars in Phoenix. So the process is the same in some regards, that I got to find sellers. And whether you're in Phoenix or you're in Memphis, most likely you're going to go online to get a list or find your sellers. So that doesn't really matter where you live. In my case, I would go on Batch, and I'm going to put in a city, or more specifically a zip code that I want to go after. And it's going to pull some data based on what I'm looking for. Vacant homes would be, that's the one that everybody's going to quickly go to. So vacant homes in this area code. And then I might put a few more parameters on there. I just want 3 2s. I just want, absentee, meaning that the person that owns the home doesn't live in the home. Or if I really want to get a little bit more motivation, I want an absentee out of state. They own a home in Arizona, but they don't live in Arizona. So there's much more hassle going on in their lives. They're having to deal with a management company, or they're having to drive over and check on the house. And then the renter goes out. So they got to find a new tenant. So if you're out of state, there's a little more stress involved, maybe a little more motivation to get this thing sold. So I'll
Yeah.
go in this case, I'm going to go into Memphis, find a zip code that I like, a zip code that I know the buyers like, and I'm going to pull that list, you know. Then I'm going to get on the phone. Again, I still don't have to be in that city to get into conversation with that seller. If I familiarize myself with that city, I can talk to that person as if I've lived in Memphis all my life. I know different, whatever you want to call it, points in the city.
Yeah.
I know what's,
Landmarks or,
yeah, landmarks, or I know specifically in that zip code, certain landmarks or things. I would advise, eventually when you start making money, go see that city, go to a few RIAs and meet, right, buyers, and have relationships, because it's still a relationship business, but you don't have to. You
yeah.
really don't have to. You can reach out to another local wholesaler if you want to get started in that city and pick their brain. You could even do a deal or two with them to familiarize. You're not going to make as much money, but you're going to get a ton of experience. And then when you feel like you're good, you can go your separate ways, or it might turn into something that you stay there together because the volume is there to have that person on the ground. But you're going to look for someone that is going to get into the property and get eyes on the property, so that you make sure that you've got the property under contract, but now you want to go validate,
Right.
yes, it is worth that. I can move that property to an investor.
Interesting. I'm always amazed talking with you, because to me it seems like virtual wholesaling would be very difficult to pull off. But in reality, so much is done online, whether you're in your own city or, multiple states away. So
I
there's
think
only
it's
certain
personality.
steps.
It's personality. It doesn't bother me. I got a lead today. We started PPC, and I got a lead today, and it's in Alabama. Well, I'm not even marketing in Alabama. My PPC is for the state of Texas. And I don't know. Now, again, it might have been that she just found our website, which has nothing to do with that. But even on our website, treehouseoffer.com, we don't have that listed. We have Texas cities listed. We have Memphis cities listed. We have Seattle, Washington. I think we have Phoenix, Arizona, but I don't have anything Alabama. So a lot of people are like, man, what am I going to do? I mean, Alabama, I don't know how to get it's numbers. First, it's personal. Can I call and have a conversation with this lady? Right.
Yeah.
And that's a motivated seller. She went to my website. She filled out information. She said she's looking to sell now. She said the property's vacant. She said she needs to sell it as soon as possible. So I'm not even cold calling her. She said, hey, I'm reaching out. Can you buy my property? So that's the best lead of all.
Yeah. It's awesome.
But again, Alabama, I've never done a deal in Alabama, but let's say that she's motivated. Let's say that we connect. Let's say the numbers make sense. I'm going to get it under contract, and then I'm going to throw it out there on some Facebook pages and some other places. Hey, anybody buying in such and such Alabama? Yeah, people. Yeah. All right, well, let's do a deal.
So you need a local somebody to inspect the property, right? And make sure it meets what you've discussed or the condition that it's been discussed about.
Absolutely.
And you need a local title company to close it. Is there anything else or?
No, I mean, at that point, I mean, I know certain title companies that do multiple states. And so you can just work with them because they are legally set up in each of those states. And so you can, I've used a title company out of Pennsylvania that does Memphis, Tennessee, or that does the state of Tennessee. But I've used that same title company. They have an office in Dallas to close a property in Arlington. But let me give you an experiment, or let's kind of do it this way. You're in Dayton, Ohio. I know you're a buy and hold guy, right? And I get a property under contract in Dayton. I don't know the first thing about Dayton, other than what you've told me. Yeah. So I'm going to call you up and say, hey, Chad, I don't know if you're really interested. It might not work for you, but I've got this property at 123 Main Street, and I'm under contract, and I'm interested. And let's just say I'm under contract for 50, and I want to sell it for 55. And I say, I'm looking. I'm not going to tell you what I have it under contract. I'm just going to say, hey, right, I got this property under contract. I'm looking to get 55. If it makes sense to you, right, let me know. Well, I know what Chad's going to do. He's going to go online real quick, or his phone. He's going to type in that address. Even though he doesn't believe in it, Zillow's going to pop up and it's going to say it's a $100,000 property, right? Well, Chad knows that may or may not be true. So he'll click out of that, look at solds. He'll look within a mile and see, you know what? There's at least 3 properties that sold for 100, 105. This doesn't look like a bad deal. Even if I had to put $20,000 into it, it's not a bad deal. So you call me back and you say, again, remember, I've never been in Dayton. And you say, you know what? I think that would work. What's the next thing you're going to say to me?
What do I need to do to get it under contract?
Well, yeah. And I'll say, well, I'm guessing, Chad, you want to go walk it. And he's going to say, yeah. And I'm going to say, well, great. I'm so new that I haven't even been in the property, Chad, but you're a veteran, a buyer. And so I know you'll know what to look for. So even if you don't buy the deal, Chad, will you just be honest with me and tell me if I got a good deal at 55? So now, and then I just say, can you take some pictures for me? And I'll tell you the pictures that I want. Well, heck, Chad isn't having to compete with anybody. Heck yeah, I'll send you some pictures because you're not even marketing it and I get to go look at it. So you don't even take pictures. You get in there and you've committed to take pictures, but you say, no, this is the deal. And you say, hey, Chris, if it's okay, I'll send you some pictures, but I don't think you need them because I want to buy it. Right. So let's say that we transact, you're tickled pink. You got it for 55. You're going to put 10, you're going to refi. You've got a renter. Great deal. Well, either you're going to call me back or I'm going to call you back and say, hey, Chad, could we kind of set a pipe system up here where anything else I get under contract, I just bring the deal to you first. And then if you don't like it, I can market it to somebody else. Well, what's an investor like you going to say? Heck yeah.
Right.
You're not blasting it to Dayton buyers. You're just sending it to Chad. And Chad, all I ask in return is when you go look at the property without anybody bothering or competing, would you take some pictures for me? And that way, if you guys and your team choose not to buy it, I can go out there and accurately market it to somebody who does want it. From there, there's a relationship. Chad's not going to buy all of them. So, but through that, Chad might say, but we'll always be your picture taker. And we work out a deal that I pay somebody $30 for them every time to go spend 15, 20 minutes to take the certain pictures that I want. And then through that relationship and other buyers, I'll find a wholesaler who's hungry that says, I'll go take your pictures if I can learn. And that might become an acquisitions person for me who's on the ground. It just kind of grows from there. But I want to say this, that's not for everybody. There are certain controlling type personalities that would just say, I just can't do that. And I respect that.
Yeah. I think it would appeal to some people who are in Phoenix or California or, in an area that's maybe difficult, just for the amount of money that you have to invest to get a return. That might be appealing to look at a virtual model to be able to work in another city. But for people who are, obviously your first step, I would think for most people would be to work where they live. It's going to be simpler, but I think it's reassuring to people that process really isn't that different between the work in the city you live and the virtual. So
yeah, because of technology, because of technology, you can get everything that you need about that property to someone else, because sometimes the numbers are so good you don't even have to take pictures. Right? The buyer's like, I don't care how bad it is. I like that price. I'll buy it. And that's far and few between, but I'm just saying it's not that hard to find somebody to go take pictures. The only other thing I have to do in certain circumstances is there is somebody that just won't do a deal unless you're standing right in front of them, right? They're just that person. I respect that. So I go find somebody that represents me that goes. It's generally going to be some type of investor that I reach out. Am I going to get probably the whole assignment fee on that deal? No. But to me, something's better than nothing if I come across that personality that says, I'll sign the agreement if somebody's standing here face to face with me. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
If I have to go send you and it's a 10,000 assignment and you say, Chris, I want 30% for the work I'm going to have to do. I'll take 7 over 0. It was a $10,000 deal. You get 3, I get 7, because I did the heavy lifting to get them to agree to my pricing. And all you're going to do is physically go stand in front of them and shake their hand and sign it and take pictures. Okay. Because I'm not looking to do one deal. I'm trying to do as many deals as possible.
Yeah, sure. All right. So for everybody interested, there it is, step by step, how to do a wholesale deal, whether it's a single family or an apartment in your hometown or city multiple states away.
Absolutely.
That's it. All right. I appreciate it, Chris. I appreciate the breakdown and the specifics.
Absolutely.
Pretty awesome deal.
Yep. I keep reaching for my glasses, but I don't have my
glasses. So I guess the only thing we didn't say with this deal was, what was the final assignment fee?
It was hefty. It was hefty. It was $59,500.
Was that worth that? To me, that seems worth a lot of negotiations and phone calls and pulling people in.
Yep.
So yeah. So all right, that's awesome, man. If that doesn't encourage somebody to start talking to people and driving the neighborhood or putting out mailers, I don't know what would.
Yep, absolutely.
It's completely up to the amount of effort you put in and your willingness to be uncomfortable and talk to people. So
yep,
it's awesome.
Just don't stop. Just don't stop.
There we go. You always say it. Just keep going.
Keep going.
I'm going to say it for you. All right. Always good talking with you, Chris. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks, Chad. I really appreciate it.